Hello. All right. I am really excited today because I'm going to show you one of my favorite things to do right now. Absolute favorite. I'm going to show you a few examples and I don't know. You let me know what you think. This is going to be all about texture and color and play. So this is one I just did a moment ago, sort of remembering the process, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything. And then these are from a little while back. Okay. Oh, I really love this green and blue. And this one here. All right. So I've really been just enjoying mark making, playing with texture, playing with line and color. And I am primarily using the following tools. And these colors are going to be the ones we start with. But if we play around some more, we might break out some others. So this is a PaperArtsy Infusions Emerald Isle. It's a colored walnut stain, so it's got some walnut crystal in there, as well as pigment crystals, and they all sort of do their own thing at different rates. And then this is Brusho crystals in sea green. No walnut in this one, just pigment. And this is Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus watercolor. It's really, really concentrated watercolor. And then depending, I also sometimes will bring in things like these, I think willow or vine charcoals, little charcoals, these water-soluble graphite crayons. This one here is a marabou art crayon. Sometimes I'll get out Neocolors or watercolor pencil. I've actually done that a few times. And now that I think about it, I'm going to do it right now. Let's grab this guy here. This is a Caran d'Ache Supracolor 2, or Supracolor, and it's in opaline green. It's a watercolor pencil, and I'm just gonna move it around on the page and try to make some nice scribbly, loose, fun lines. And I'm also in the mood for some of my little circles. I love my little circles. So we'll get those in there. There we are. Ooh. All right, just a few. It's a very small surface, so sometimes the biggest thing I run into with these is not overdoing the application, because, oops, see, and I opened this and the Brusho powder fell right out, so I'm just going to go with it. There's just a very fine sprinkle of powder. It's honestly not even that easy to see, but that's enough for right now. I might bring out the infusions, but at the moment, I want to take a less is more approach, because if you saw, or if you recall, I showed you the one I just did, and this one had a lot of the Hydrus, and possibly a little bit more Brusho crystal than I wanted. And then the only other material I'm going to use for this, by the way, this is watercolor paper. This is fluid cold press. But honestly, any watercolor paper is really fine. I don't think you need anything fancy because we're not doing all of the careful, lifting and other like straight up watercolor techniques. And honestly, letting the materials just do what they do is a big part of this. So use the cheap stuff. I don't think you're going to be upset. if you use the cheap stuff or the expensive stuff, just use what you got. I'm going to use clear gesso. And so all of the stuff that's currently on the paper is water soluble here. Ultimately, that just means that it's going to react to water, it's going to move, and then if it dries and I go back to it again later with more wet media or water, it's going to move again. And I want it to move right now. Later on, I'm going to do stuff that is going to make me not want it to move. But right now, I want it to move. And actually, I'm going to throw one more little bit in here. So I have this little container of other water-soluble stuff. These are, let's see, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, Cretacolor sticks. I think in, what is it, sanguine, I don't know. But I'm going to roll that through because I think it's going to add some interesting contrast. And so I did more of those lovely winding lines that I like to do, but I also think I want to get some straighter lines represented just for fun. Just get a couple of those in. And that stick is also water soluble, so it's gonna move. Now you can use whatever you want to get water down on your piece. I almost always use a spray bottle. Sometimes I'll use a continuous spray, like this one here, that you can usually find in like hair care sections and whatnot. But I am in the mood, especially with the smaller pieces, I like to use a smaller, more targeted sort of spritz bottle. And I like that because I can focus on one area or another and kind of vary how I apply the water, and that changes up the effect. So let's go. See what I told you, I had those crystals on there and it wasn't very much, but I didn't want to overdo it, and this is why. I mean, we've got all of a sudden so much color on this paper. And then this is one of my other favorite art tools. It is a bamboo skewer. I've been using the same ones for a long time, so I just bought myself some more. Nice cheap tool. You can also use a chopstick, although I like how pointy and thin this line is. And I love to run these through wet media and just get some fun and funky lines going. So that's a lot of fun. All right. Now from here, I could stop, let it dry, and then apply my gesso. I can add other stuff to it. I could apply my gesso now, even while it's wet. I don't usually like to do that. I like to kind of let it get dry, and then when I go over it with the gesso, it's still going to move and pick up color and do some interesting things, but it won't move as much. So usually I can get it to a place where I'm fairly happy with what I've got and then apply the gesso. Got a couple of options here. This is just a little salt cellar. I get these at the flea markets. I like them. I picked them up initially thinking that the bottoms would be interesting to use when gel printing, but a lot of times the bottom is recessed to a point where the pattern doesn't come through on the gel plate, but they're great at just being dishes that hold things. And I had some crystals from a different piece that I way over applied crystals to. And I thought, why not put them on here? These ones are, I think, mostly yellow and orange. And again, it doesn't look like there's much on there, but it is doing a little bit of something because I'm seeing it start to bloom where it's hit areas that are already wet. And then once I spray it with water, you see more of that color coming in, which is just, for me, a lot of fun. And I'm trying to decide if I want to introduce anything else. Let's see. I'm tempted to get some other color in. I'm over here. I've got a big bunch of water-soluble pencils and whatnot behind me. And I'm just going to dig out Derwent Inktense. This is Poppy Red. I love the Inktense pencils. They're wonderful. And this is the most contrast I think I've had in one of these so far. I usually try to work in a fairly harmonious palette because I know the pigment is going to move and therefore mix. And if you know anything about color theory, then you know that when complementary colors on the color wheel, so like red and green, for example, mix, they tend to create a very muted, like a brown kind of a color. And sometimes people really don't like that. I like a lot of the tones that I get when I combine complementary colors, as long as I don't overmix and overwork. And right now you're seeing the red and you're not seeing it mix a whole lot with what's underneath. And I like that. So a lot of times though, that's why all of these other pieces, I mean, brown is brown, so it's not a great example, but you can see I'm working primarily in colors that work together or are close to each other on the color wheel. And so this is the first time I've done a piece where I've got so much complementary color, but it's just calling to me today. All right, I had a little extra water and pigment left over on this pencil, and I've got these little tiny sheets over here that I'm basically using as like roll-off sheets. I constantly use scrap pieces of paper and other things to put additional or extra leftover pigment on, so that I don't waste anything. So that's why I'm over here with these. And a lot of times those sheets end up looking as good, or in some cases even better, than the things I made on purpose. So it's really fun to play with. And I just spritzed them both with water. This is more of that leftover like yellow and orange crystals that I had. I just dumped out. And then this is that Inktense pencil. And I spritzed them both with water, so they're doing some fun stuff. They've already got a layer of gesso on them from the piece I was playing with earlier and some other experimenting. So they shouldn't mix over much with the color that's underneath, which is an interesting way to play with this. And eventually I want to do some bigger pieces and do even more of that experimentation, because when I use that gesso to seal over top of this wet media piece, then I can go over it with other layers of color or wet media. And because I've sealed the previous layer with the gesso, it's not going to move. And so I'm going to get layers instead of color mixing. I've mentioned this before in similar videos where I talk about it. Unless you put like a super heavy coat of gesso or a double coat of gesso or something over top, sometimes the color that's on the paper when you put your gesso down is going to mix with your gesso, or it's just still going to be concentrated enough. And particularly with something like gesso, it tends not to seal it so much that it won't move at all. I actually think that that adds to the really interesting effects. So it does mean that it's possible that when I seal this, if I then apply more stuff over top, some of this green especially, or any area where there's a lot of pigment, we may see some pull up even through that layer of gesso. And that's okay with me. I think that's fun. So I'm not upset about it. If I really was worried about it, I would probably let the first coat of gesso dry and put another one over top. So you certainly can go back over it with more than one coat and really get a good seal. But I tend to really enjoy just letting it do what it's going to do. The other thing that can be a lot of fun is going through and picking up pigment or water. I did that actually with that brown piece here. There were these spots where it had a high concentration of that Hydrus watercolor. It was really dark. And so I picked up this little old scrubby brush I've got. I mean, look, trying to get that in the camera so you can see it well, and I'm doing a very bad job. Okay, there we go. See how tiny that little brush head is? I mean, it's just a little nub. And I got the area wet again. This is before I applied a gesso layer. I got the area wet, so I knew that Hydrus was going to continue to react. And once I got it nice and good and wet, I scrubbed at it and then picked it up with my little piece of napkin here. And then I got some lighter spots in the middle. And so I could certainly do something like that. So I just dipped my little brush in some water. I'm going to come in here and move that around for a moment and then pick it up. And that actually pulls up some of the pigment that was down on the paper. And then I'm just wetting that brush, getting a little bit of the stuff off of it. And that allows you to see any lines or marks or other things too that were further under that layer of pigment on the paper. So we start to add additional texture and interest when we do those kinds of things. One thing about the Inktense that's interesting here, Inktense is generally known for being water soluble the first time you get it wet. So it moves the first time you get it wet, and then when it dries, it is not going to move around. So it's not like a traditional watercolor pencil that you would get wet and spread, and then if you let it dry and wet it again, you could move it around again. It is more permanent once it dries. However, I have found that much like the Hydrus or other areas where there's a lot of pigment or things, if I lay down a lot of that Inktense and then get it wet, oftentimes it will continue to move for me later, even after it's dried, just because of the sheer amount of pigment that I applied when I first used it that maybe didn't get water reactive enough to then dry more permanently. I'm not quite sure what this phenomenon is there, but I assume it's something like that. So just be aware that there is a potential for some of that movement when you're using Inktense pencil. Normally, like I said, I tend to wait until it's like dry, but I'm not in the mood today. So I'm just going to put down some of that clear gesso, and I will apply it in the lighter colored areas first, where there's more white space. And that really is just because I know that as I go over the areas with more color, I am going to pick up more of that pigment. So I drop it wherever. If you've seen me before working, then this is not a shock to you, but I kind of have a tendency to drop media, gesso, matte medium, all kinds of stuff just directly on top of the piece I'm working on and then spread it. And let me add a little more. I just want to make sure that I get some decent coverage. And since I grabbed it and didn't really move what was underneath or touch too much what was underneath, and it's clear like that, again, putting it on the sides first allows me to keep those with as much of the white space as possible and maintain that. if I go over these more color saturated areas, that's where it's not as easy to see, but you should see some like blue green and mixed in there. And that's where it's picking up those colors. And so, yeah, now I'm starting to see even just on there, it's like a brown streak and there's a colored streak of that gesso. And I enjoy that. But I want that to be something that I control, which is why I often wait and do those layers later. Now I have extra gesso left over, but I also put down more water-soluble media on these little pieces. So I'm actually going to put gesso over top of those most recent colors. Oops, this is not the thickest piece of paper, so it is bending and moving quite a bit. Ooh, it is moving that Inktense pencil. And this is what I've been doing with this. It really doesn't go any further. Usually it is a single backdrop of water-soluble media, play with it, get it wet, let it move, do its thing, dry, and then apply gesso. And that's really where I have stopped. At some point, probably when I have a lot of these and they feel less precious to me, I want to start going over them more with other things. Painted papers, drawing on top of them, doing work where, you know, I'll create some sort of design and then paint the negative space to bring these textured bits through. I want to play with all of that stuff. I just have found that I really love these pieces so much once I'm done with them that I've been nervous to go back in and decide where I want to take them next. But that's okay. Whenever you have something like that you're really getting into and you know that you want to do something else, but you're kind of scared you're going to mess it up, again, one of the best things that you can do is just repeat, make more of that same thing over and over, because you just get more practice, it feels more natural, and it feels less like a phenomenon, like you accidentally walked into a good piece of art that you might never be able to do again. Like you repeat it, you remember how you did it. You know, I hadn't done these in weeks, and I got, because I wrote myself a little note on all of them. It's Hydrus watercolor plus Brusho infusions covered with clear gesso. I did these in August. We're officially in November. And I even wrote a number 1 because I anticipated I wanted to do other things with this. But once I looked at them, I was like, did I get those wet before I put the gesso on? Probably. It looks like there's too much movement for gesso to be the only wet media applied, but I'm not sure. Like, you know, and the more you do it, the more it feels rote and familiar and like you can keep doing it over and over. So I'm getting out another Hydrus. Here we go. This little sap green. And let's do one that is a little bit more, what's the word I want? Harmonious in terms of the colors. I'm going to use a little bit of this vine. I think it's vine charcoal. There's vine and there's willow, and I think this is vine. I don't remember. It's a skinny charcoal, and I really like it. And that's probably more than I meant to lay down, but it just felt really nice in my hand, so I kept doing it. It is what it is. I'm going to get that extra off on my baby wipe. All right. So with these, they're so concentrated. The mistake I made with this one earlier with my sepia watercolor was I put 3 like squeeze drops, like that size or greater. And then with the other one, I went through and I just like didn't squeeze anything out of the pipette at all. I just touched it against the paper. that doesn't look like much, but when it gets wet, it's going to really start to move and shake. And much like the other one, I opened it up and some of the crystal fell out. But that's okay. Whoop, that's more than I meant to use. Oh well. You know what? We're just gonna take it. You would like, that's part of the reason that I moved. The Brushos were in little pots, and I moved them into these spray bottles or squirt bottles to make it a little bit more targeted an application. But to be honest, it's still pretty messy. You just gotta accept and embrace it. Oh yeah. There we go. Oh baby. I mean, if that doesn't get you happy and excited, then I don't know what will. I just, like, this alone already has my heart just singing and bursting. And now I'm going to start to drag that color around, make it really move. And I almost always do it like this with the skewer, but I'm suddenly curious how it would behave if I pulled out a brush and tried to use a damp brush to move it around. I'm going to grab one of my semi-nice, I guess it's, yeah, semi-nice watercolor brushes, because this is all water-soluble stuff. And I'm going to sort of more finely pick up some of these pigments and play with them. This is not something I have ever done before, and I need to be aware that there's no point in being super precise and precious with this, because it's gonna move at least a little when I put the gesso over top. So it's a great way to kind of experiment and also pick up the extra pigment, because there is, once again, too much pigment. Like I said, I knew that as soon as that big drop of Hydrus went down. And so I'm going to grab these blobs of Hydrus before they dry too much, and pull up just a tiny bit of that. But first I want to kind of play with the brush, because I'm really liking the way that it looks while I do. I could do this for hours. Just make a million of these things. They're really relaxing and interesting, and it's fun to experiment with different colors like I just did. I'm not sure that first one we did here is my very favorite in terms of color palette, but you watch. Wherever that one goes next, it's probably going to start to turn into one of my favorites. And I just, yeah, I'm really glad I am continuing to experiment with this technique as I go. And like I said, at some point I want to get out some bigger pieces of paper and more, and experiment with more layers and other things with this. Because there are some limitations to working this small. Okay. Ooh, there was some extra water down there, so when I plopped the little brush down, stuff moved in ways I didn't expect. I love that. You know, if I let this dry more, then I would have a point where this big blob up here at the top would be one of the only things still wet. And then I wouldn't have any more surprise movement. but I like the surprise movement. I like making art that surprises me. And I don't think that's ever going to change. It's just too much fun. See just a little bit of wet there. Yeah, okay, I'm really glad that I used this brush. I'm gonna get the rest of the color off there. We're done with that. Now I'm gonna take this ratty paper napkin that is at the end of its life, and I'm gonna go in here and I'm really gonna smoosh it down in that blob and pick up as much of that color as I can, because now I've got all these really cool lines and speckles underneath it that were hiding. And boy howdy, I love that. And I did just a tiny bit there. And probably not on this scrap, but I think on this one where there's a little bit more brown and a little bit going on like that, I'm gonna try and blot off a little bit of the excess green and see if any, and it's really faint, but it's there now, and it added just the teeniest bit of added interest. Okay, I love this, and currently it is my favorite. And again, one of the nicest things, I mean, I'll be honest, I overdo it. When I get excited about something, I tend to go all in. And these PaperArtsy infusions, like I thought I loved Brusho until I tried these. And these little walnut crystals just add something, they add just like a little extra on top of what's already there. You know what I should do is order some just walnut. I mean, I have some, but I use it because I use just walnut. But I could take like just walnut crystals and then mix it with some of the Brusho to get a similar effect to these infusions. I may need to try that. Another thing you can try in these, and I'm gonna need enough water down for it to be valuable. So I'm gonna hit this area that's pretty green. Let's see, it may have already soaked in too much, but it can be fun to add the salt in and see how that behaves with the watercolor. So I added just a bit of that. Not going to hurt anything, and might add even more texture and dimension, which feels almost impossible at this point. I'm going to leave this one to dry, and because I want to make sure it's good and dry before I put gesso on it. So I'll do that. I'll knock the salt off before we apply the gesso as well. And then we'll come back and see how this one looks after it's got that gesso layer applied. So I'll see you again in just a bit. For me. Get your tail off the keyboard. All right, she's still off camera, but Sassy has woken up, and I have a feeling she may jump up here before this is over with. All right, I'm going to put some gesso down. There's our art cat. How you doing, sweet girl? Don't worry. Get that out your way. Yeah. How's my girl? Yeah. Yeah, you like that piece? Okay. Let's commence attempting to work without you. Oh, you're getting down already? Okay. Okay. Just made a brief appearance on camera. Now we're done. I already knocked off most of the salt, although I think I found a tiny bit. It didn't do nothing, but it didn't do much. And that's okay. It wasn't like any part of this was hinging on the salt. I just felt like playing with it. And that's honestly my favorite part about these is there's just so many opportunities, like I said earlier, to experiment, to play around, to try something different. you know, and you're probably, if you're there and you're thinking, well, I don't have those crystals, or I don't have that Hydrus watercolor, experiment with other media. This really will work essentially with any wet media, and especially any water soluble media. If you've got Neocolor 2 crayons or Marabou crayons or pastels, you could, sometimes I will use this little guy here and grate pastels into little crystals. Be careful not to be breathing a bunch of that stuff in, but you know, if you want to get the powder effect and see how it works, it's going to behave a little differently, but it's yet another way to do this. If you want to, you know, have those drops of watercolor, get some watercolor that you already have wet, you know, really wet, and put it in palette, and then you can drop it with a paintbrush, or if you have a little, you know, dropper or pipette or anything, you could pick up the pigment, the wet pigment with that, and go. And so here's this one, trying to get it a little closer up so you can see how it looks. And I just really love that. And I love that I took the time with my brush to pick up that extra sap green and move it around. I see options now. Like, there's a lot of the Brusho, or not the Brusho, the PaperArtsy Infusions are really concentrated in the center, and I kind of want to pick up those colors and find ways to incorporate them more throughout the piece. But yeah, this is another successful use of this technique, and I don't know, I'm super happy with this one. I also, while I was waiting for it to dry, decided to sketch a little hair rabbit on this scrap piece I had. I used just a regular colored pencil in this like turquoise color, and then I used distress paint. I still haven't really, I've seen Tim Holtz talk about it, and I get it. I did spray it with water. It does do a little something. I'm just not sure that distress paint is my paint of choice, but it was nice and fluid and covered really well, and I put it over the outside. And that's what I was talking about earlier, where, you know, you can draw or stencil things in on top and then paint the negative space to cover up the design, so that the other parts that are left uncovered really pop. And there's some fun ways to do that. So that little rabbit there, or hare, is a good example of what you can do with something like that background once you're done. I mean, there's a million things you can do with it, but that's one I decided to tinker with while I was waiting for this to dry, because I was getting bored. And that's it. That's today's video. If you liked it, please give it a like, and consider subscribing and hitting the little bell so you get notified as I release new videos. And I really appreciate you joining me here today. I'll see you tomorrow.